cacti like that.
I should just put these up by their name tags.
I will hand it to them. Just bring them out, we'll hand it to them. They won't look at them before I hand it.
When we're up?
What do you want me to introduce you?
Hey, how's it going? How are you?
Good. I have a question for you.
Yeah.
We got an RFP out right now for Brattleville stuff that we can get proposals into for improvements and stuff like that. Also got a proposal from Richard Wilson to purchase the upper sidewalk, upper transit. I told him it was part of the RFP that that's currently out right now.
RFP is not to buy it, is it?
It's for anything. The way it's written. You tell us what you would like to do with it's a stupid thing, but no, I think according to what Greg told me, we're just going to hear from 50 different people what we want to have happen there. Oh no, I know.
Okay.
Just general
public, yeah.
But I guess I'm wondering if we haven't started any surplus up there, so I didn't put it until into the 12th session. I think that's appropriate. He sent me I got it last Friday, Thursday. But I told him to send it in as part of the RFP, do it that way. Then we'll figure out what we want to do. That was Greg's idea. Okay. What Greg tell him?
Is he really?
Well,
Just the upper part now, not the lower part.
just the part up on the cliff.
We need that anyway, we can do the job.
We gotta give it to Forest Service, we have to worry
We
about
have a
it.
special,
I agree.
I didn't know we had one, so yes, we'll do it first. I didn't see that agenda sent out, so.
We're out on par now.
Just right in front of the golf course.
We don't get it till, the city takes down to the power plant.
Oh,
And then
okay.
the west power plant cars.
Okay.
They do it.
Well, what they
No,
did
that's
is
fine.
you got to see you.
We should be, I just,
I live in that fairly neighborhood.
we had
And
wind
so
blow
we
over a
can't
couple
go
of trees,
out
one of
there
our apple trees is laying on the ground,
Okay,
so,
so that's what it is, like worse.
So
yeah,
last
that was a
we're
mess.
doing an overlay
So,
on the powerhouse, and they,
Okay.
well,
So.
they made us go
Yeah, so I'm-
right instead of
I'm
left.
fine
That
with
had-
Salem?
So I had to go down to Salem to get out of my neighborhood, and they had
Long Depot.
and there was 3 for me. And I said, well, why don't you just stop the traffic?
yeah, I hadn't, but he was here yesterday and found out he was here today, so he took me.
And they just, oh, we just work here for service.
And his car's outside, so.
How would you say that?
Mhm.
I thought that was pretty
Man.
And they said, no, Utah Barricade was it. And I called Utah Barricade and they said, no, it's the contract.
Mhm.
I called the city and they said, no, it's the county.
No, it's not a.
Quite the runaround. So I had a good laugh.
So from Highway 6 to the power plant, it's city.
City.
And then once you get west of the power plant, from there down to Woodlandsville Drive, it's all.
Well, the funny thing is, one of the guys you said, don't go to Salem, just go sneak your way back up through that other project. And when I
Don't go through our project, go through that project.
Yeah, so I called the boss, company, and I just said, well, you just might want to know that your flaggers are putting in water by sending us through another inspection. Oh, yeah. What a mess.
We're doing that one first.
So, yes.
Are you doing it first, or are you doing it?
I think we're gonna
Nope.
do it.
Nope. So we're doing the,
It is?
we're doing the road one first, okay.
Okay. I asked Glenn, I wasn't aware that it was.
Yeah. All right, we're gonna get started this morning in just a second. Are you ready? Ready to go? Okay.
Welcome this morning. We're going to start with our Administrative Control Board of the Utah Valley Roads Special Service District. We have 2 items on our agenda. The first one is to approve the minutes of the December 5th, 2017 meeting. It's been a little while. Any questions on that? Any concerns?
No, and Mr. Chairman, if I recall, that's just basically the adoption of the 2018 budget at that meeting, so
Okay,
we haven't met since then.
a motion to be in order.
Well, I'll go ahead and make a motion that we adopt the minutes from the December 5th, 2007 Utah Valley Road Special Service District meeting.
Second?
We've got a motion and a second to approve the minutes of December 5th, 2017 meeting. All in favor say aye.
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 That passes 3-0. The second one is to adopt a resolution approving and authorizing an execution of an interlocal cooperative agreement with Utah County concerning specific road improvements. Thoughts or concerns on that one?
This essentially is just an administrative action to facilitate moving funds into the account for Public Works to use on their various road projects.
Right. Richard's nodding his head, and he's thankful for that. Do you have anything to say on that, Richard?
No, that's very what you have.
Okay. I didn't have any questions. Any questions from the board? Okay, motion to be in order on that then.
I'll move that we adopt a resolution approving and authorizing the execution of an interlocal cooperation agreement with Utah County concerning specific road improvements.
And I'll second that.
I got a motion and a second to adopt the resolution as stated number 2 on our regular agenda. All in favor say aye.
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 That passes 3-0. Are there any public comments? Seeing none?
I'll make a motion that we adjourn.
Second?
Got a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We're adjourned. Thank you.
All right, we'll go ahead and welcome you out to our Utah County Board of Commissioners meeting this morning. We're grateful for your attendance and participation with us this day. As typical, we'd like to start our meeting with a prayer, reading, or thought, along with the Pledge of Allegiance, and we look to the audience for volunteers who would like to join with us in that. Are there any with us today who would be willing to offer a prayer, reading, or thought, or lead us in the pledge? Perfect. Anyone for a prayer, reading, or thought? Seeing none, we'll bring that maybe up here.
I'll take it.
Thank you. Okay, Bill.
Our Heavenly Father, as we come this morning to meet and gather and discuss issues with the county, as we have the fortunate ability to be here under a banner of freedom and opportunity, we thank Thee for the many blessings that Thou hast bestowed upon us. We recognize throughout the world that there are many who suffer and are not under the same privileges that we have. We're thankful, Father, for those who fight for the freedoms that we enjoy, especially putting their lives on the line and doing so. We pray for them, their safety. We pray that as we go through the issues of today, that we can do so in a manner that be pleasing unto Thee. And we pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you. All right, we'll now go through the process of building our agenda. Our agenda looks like we missed a meeting last week, so we have a couple items to cover. Specifically starting off, all items will be considered moved to consent unless held for further discussion. Currently on our consent agenda, we have 32 items. Were there any of those that you had questions on?
Could we pull number 11. And I have number 23 circled. 25 and 27.
We are pulling 23, right?
Yes, but I have to look at my notes because I can't remember
Well,
why I circled that
I
one. but
circled that because we also have in our regular agenda a discussion on some of the tax sale.
That's what I pulled it for. Yeah, I was wondering if we needed to, I was
Yeah.
trying to do a double check to see if they were on there simultaneously or if they were held separately.
Yeah, is that okay?
Yeah, well, Bert,
Bert?
Just tried turning that microphone on and went weird. Bert Harvey, Tax Administration Office. The items on consent agenda, item number 23, those are all the uncontested parcels that were sold. So that's not the parcels that are up for protest today, and also excluded from that list are any parcels that have the presence of a federal tax lien that requires us to wait 120 days before. So these are just only the parcels that were sold, that there's no protest or nothing else that requires us to wait on them. Typically, I've done these all together all at once, but I decided to try this year to just do the part and get those tax deeds out the door and just deal with the ones that still needed our attention or had something else holding them off. So
Thank you. Then I can leave, I personally leave it on consent.
Perfect. Okay, so 11, 25, and 27. Moving to our regular agenda, I had regular agenda items number 9, 11, 12, 20, and 21.
21.
Any additionals, Greg?
Trying to make sure that had the Rocky Mountain in it. Did that have, because they would like to make a presentation.
Yeah, it's, well, number 1,
Yeah, we normally have a
have
finding.
to have a finding on that
That's
one.
right.
You said 9, 11, 12,
9, 11, 12.
16.
We can, yes.
Let's see, hang on.
Oh, I saw it this
Oh,
morning.
I
Vic, what
wanted to talk
numbers?
about 16 in
is
case you
yours?
wanted to look at that. That's the reason why I circled it.
Okay, there.
So it'd just be a discussion.
Yeah.
Are you fine with that?
That's fine. Mhm.
So 16, 20, and 20.
I think that works then. Greg, you're
Yep.
good with those?
I'm good.
Okay. We'll then go ahead and move back to consent agenda item number 11. This is to ratify the commission's signature on a supplemental law enforcement service agreement with Cache Valley Electric.
Yes. Okay. Court here.
Don't see court. Hopefully we're
He's
able
up in
to
his office if we need to get him.
Okay, maybe, I got a call last week for ratification. The ratifications usually go right through. The only problem that I had was that, the signature that I put on there for ratification, usually on the application it says 4 hours, minimum of 4 hours. This is 3. We have 2 of them on this agenda in which they have 3 hours, and so it should be 4 hours as the minimum.
Okay.
So when I pull the number 11,
So when you signed it, did it say 3 hours or 4 hours? Do you know?
when I actually was gone last week, and so
Okay, so-
when Brian called me, I said he can go ahead and stamp that, but it must be 4 hours.
Okay.
Well, number 11, isn't that Commissioner Ivy's signature?
I signed it as well, so.
And that one does say 4 hour minimum after the charge per hour. The one that's on the agenda.
The one I see on the agenda has the times on it. It says from
Yeah,
6
it
o'clock
does,
to
and then
9.
below it, it does say in parentheses, 4 hour
4 hour
minimum.
minimum.
So
So I
I
just
wonder
wanna
how
make
we
sure.
build it.
So it should be a minimum of 4 hours. And we have another one on the agenda in which they've got a 3-hour one on there for 6 deputies.
But if we have the note that it's a minimum of 4, perhaps we just need to make,
So do we bill them 4 hours?
Yeah, and we have been billing 4 hours based on the
Okay.
contracts.
So if we could just make sure, I don't know what you change on that, I don't know,
My-
at this point, if we just.
My
leave it
guess
and
is
it's
that
billed.
those timeframes probably came from the applicant, right? And then we just explained to them that there is a 4-hour minimum charge, even if they only want us for the 3 hours.
Yeah, that's been our standard operation, is to, they put the times they need and we just let the deputies know, but pretty sure they understand that it's a 4-hour minimum.
But they understand that.
But I can check on that real quick as well.
You would, there's another one coming up on the agenda that has a 3 that.
Yeah, I'll step out and make a phone call, and make sure
Yeah.
they're clear.
Mr. Chairman, why Under Sheriff Brower's there? Have a
Chief Deputy.
Deputy.
or Chief Deputy, yes. Sorry, Under Sheriff Turpin. Chief Deputy Brower, just had an additional question. From a risk management standpoint on these supplemental contracts, who is liable when one of our officers is injured or we incur damage to vehicles, or in the case of the recent one, the motorcycle? Is the outfit that we contract with have some type of liability coverage that covers that, or do we incur that? That was just something based upon what happened this last week. I was curious on how that's
Because we
covered.
do put that when we do it for cities. When we've contracted with cities, we have that in there because we've done that. But that is an interesting question. So when we do that,
Yeah, I don't know, we'd have to look into clarification. To my understanding, we wouldn't do that, but we can look into that.
We wouldn't,
Wouldn't hold, say if we were doing event security for a filming, or we wouldn't hold that company liable if we're just standing there and, twist an ankle or, whatever circumstance is there, but we can look into that as well.
yeah, and the reason I bring that from a risk management standpoint is then if we do have a workers' comp claim, or we have lost hours or vehicle damage, then it was incurred doing the supplemental stuff versus county business. But if we don't have some type of coverage there, are we potentially liable then for those additional costs, which maybe should be factored into these supplemental contracts?
sure, but which is going to be interesting because my guess is most of these companies don't carry a $2.5 million governmental liability insurance.
Some of them are just parties.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know in the past that has not been part of the contract. It's been for law enforcement services. If there's any workers' comp issue, that's been on Utah County and the sheriff's office. So if that's something that you want to be done, that's gonna have to be built into contracts going forward.
Well, and I know that we're fairly tight in that area, and if we're incurring additional costs doing supplemental stuff,
It'd
then,
be interesting to find out how many incidences we have had during any of that over the last couple of years to see if we have. So,
and am I correct that there was an incident this last week?
Yeah, there was.
Okay.
on a car or a person?
Motorcycle.
Motorcycle.
One of our two?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, the motors.
Okay, so definitely something to look into there. All right, I'll go ahead and entertain a motion.
Move that we ratify the commission chair's signature as stated in number 11.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for ratification of consent agenda item number 11. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, motion will carry 3-0. Next on our agenda, we have consent agenda item number 25. This is a look at the abatement in the personal property accounts attached for the years indicated. Commissioner, you had a question on this one?
On this one, I don't understand why we can't, Zingo was acquired last year by Zija, Z-I-G-J-A International, which is headquarters in Linden. I don't understand why we can't go after the money that's owed there. There's a substantial amount of money. Why it has to be just written off when it's an acquisition. I mean, I know it says on here that the business is now defunct.
Yeah, but
Or gone
you're
out.
right, because anybody who buys the land under Greenbelt is responsible for all those back taxes, so why wouldn't an acquisition be responsible for any old taxes?
That's my question, is why we wouldn't go after that.
So Jeannie Bowen, Treasurer's Office. I am going to assume that we did not get enough information on that then to know that they were bought out. So I'm assuming then that they would have bought the equipment is what you're thinking?
Yeah, well, from just the preliminary research that we did on it, it was, when you acquire it, you usually buy everything, with it, the equipment, the building, the licensing, everything that comes with a company.
And it should follow the equipment, so, we can pull that and do some more research into that.
Okay, so on our process then, because my concern was I could see this, if you wanted, you could set up a bunch of shell companies and just get around, paying taxes, right? And just say, oh, now we're required over here, that company's gone. What processes do we have in place for any others? I mean, some of them are smaller, $100. I don't want to be sitting there spending a lot of money chasing stuff that maybe doesn't warrant it, but still in the sense of, this one was an easier one because it's a bigger company, so it's easier to see what happened there. But what do we do in the future?
Unfortunately, I did not do this one, so I don't know what he did. But, so I've been working with Daylight Donuts in Payson, right? And so when I've called and they have 2 years owing, they're like, well, we bought it from someone else. I go, but you bought the equipment. So they've been even contacting the old owners to see if they will help pay, but we usually work with them to say, hey, it follows equipment, not, because before Daylight there was like 2 other donut shops there, so they have to, but we let them know it follows equipment, it does not. I mean, they are still liable when they buy it, they have to, that's part of the research of buying a company, is making sure everything is paid in full.
Okay.
So you really had one that we're writing off from 2018 already?
So Troy put this on. And I did not look at them. I guess you put that on. I don't know any of the companies at the moment, but I will look and, because for
That's the
2018.
mail house one you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, generally, you'd wait more than 60 to 90 days to write something off, but, I mean, 2018 is pretty current. But
is pretty
again,
current.
if that, whatever the history is on it, that one's kind of
Yeah,
interesting.
typically, when these come and we look at them, I asked Troy as well, on these, and he assured me that the business was no longer there and the assets weren't available to go after. Part of it is we work with the assessor's office too, and they do some research to determine if the business is still there to bill or, and so in this case, I was told that they were not in existence.
Well, my only question is I understand in 2014, 2015, right? The equipment's going to be darn tough to find. 2018, tracking down equipment at that point, everybody's memory should be fairly fresh.
Unless the equipment is just gone. I mean, if they're closed and gone and it's, there's no way to track the equipment.
And that was really my question is.
Right.
Yeah.
We can follow up on that to make sure, but that's our understanding is that the company's completely gone. They haven't filed for a new license. They're not in the location anymore. But we can follow up with that.
So it does follow the equipment.
It does, and
so
it
if they
creates.
sell it to somebody, then they pick up the liability for it.
They do, but as you know, that can be a horrendous problem to try and figure all of that out.
But we've done it before. We've tracked it before to where other people have purchased it.
Yeah, and we can, in conjunction with the assessor's office, see if we can figure out, especially with the Zango and Zija, if that's the case, we can identify it, then yes, we can build them for it. But that is the challenge with personal property. It's a lot more difficult to track and trace and collect on. It's because it's movable. But yeah, we'll follow up on it, and if it's okay with you, we'll pull this item and do a little more research and come back next week. Is that okay?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Pull the whole item? Or just those 2?
I don't think there's any rush. So let's just pull the whole item and we'll do some further research on a couple of those items and then bring it back.
Great.
Other questions?
I'll move that we continue item 25 for 2 weeks.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to continue consent agenda item number 25. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion will carry 3-0. Next, we have consent agenda item number 27. This is to approve and authorize a signature on a supplemental law enforcement agreement. Commissioner Lee?
Again, this is the one that they have down here that are requesting from 11 to 2. I just wanted to make sure that the 4-hour minimum is being upheld.
I actually have a different question on this one, but it's more of a commission one, so I'll wait for Chief Deputy Brower.
Mike Brower, again, I just clarified that it follows the contract there, the minimum hours, and also they are billed from the time the deputy leaves his home to the event, and then stops when the deputy gets back. So there is that minimum time frame, including the travel.
Okay.
Okay.
No, yeah, I don't have a question for you. So my only issue with this is, the irony is the acquisition of the 6 deputies is $120 more than the county. We sponsor the event through our TRCC money, and then in essence our donation in essence covers the law enforcement. So it's kind of just one of those weird things that we're sponsoring and then paying for it, and it's like, is our sponsor really paying for the deputies? So why should we sponsor? Why don't we just, donate the time? So it's just kind of a weird one that we do. And previous years we've actually donated even more. So that's my question from maybe we ought to consider some of those things in the future. So not because it's a poor event or anything like that. It's just unique in that case.
Okay. Good observation. I would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion that we approve and authorize the commission chair to sign the supplemental law enforcement agreement as stated in number 27 on our consent agenda.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve consent agenda item number 27. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion will carry 3-0. Now move to regular agenda item number 1. This is a request from Salem City to waive a $200 event fee.
Yeah, this one's just a finding.
And we normally ask for the report.
And the report back is all.
I'll move then that we approve the request from Salem City to waive the $200 event permit fee, finding that the event fee, the public interest is outweighed by the cost of the event for the Salo bike race on June 28th through the 29th. Sounds like that already happened. Okay, so when this be ratified? Okay, and we would like a report on the event.
And I'll second that.
Motion and second to approve regular agenda item number 1 with findings. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion will carry 3-0. Next, we have a regular agenda item number 9. This is a presentation of 2017 audit by Gilbert and Stewart Certified Public Accountants. We'll turn the time to them.
Happy to be here today. I'm James Gilbert from Gilbert and Stewart CPAs. Just going to go over your financial statements today, and we'll go right to it. In the large packet is the financial statements. The smaller packet is the single audit reports, and I'll go over both of them. But in the financial statements, going to page 1 is the independent auditor's report. So this is our report on the financial statements to determine whether they're reported in a materially correct manner in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. And our report is an unmodified opinion. That's a clean opinion, the highest opinion that can be received on your financial statements. Directly behind the audit report is the management discussion and analysis. This is a section that goes from page 3 to page 12. Contained in here is a synopsis of the changes in fund balances, highlights of what happened in the county during the year, kind of a quick way to understand some of the things that happened in the financial operations of the county during the year without having to read the whole 150-page document. Then behind that, we start into the financial statements, and that starts on page 13. And 13 and 14 are full accrual financial statements. This includes all the assets, all the liabilities of the county, tries to put the county on the same basis as a business entity would be. It's a pretty good attempt that the Governmental Accounting Standards Board created a few years back. So that includes all the assets and liabilities and revenues and expenditures, including depreciation and all those kinds of things. If you start on page 15, these are the more standard governmental type financial statements. Page 16 or 15 and 17 are the balance sheet and the statement of revenues and expenditures. These financial statements are reported on a modified accrual basis of accounting, which is basically your budgetary basis. So the balance sheet includes cash, accounts receivable, accounts payable, but it doesn't include all your fixed assets and all your long-term liabilities. And then again, the page 17 is your revenues and expenditures on a modified accrual basis of accounting also. You can see on page 17, you've got your major funds, which are the general, health, transportation, and capital and debt service. And then there's a column for total non-major funds. And the non-major funds are reported on a financial statement in the back of the financial statements. Those are all your non-major special revenue funds, which you have quite a few of. And that column is summed there. The next few pages, page 19, 20 and 21, these are the proprietary fund financial statements. So this is your internal service funds. So these are reported already on an accrual basis. And this is all your internal service funds summed up again. The detail of those internal service funds broken down by each internal service fund is contained in the back of the financial statements. And then page 22 is the agency funds. This includes the auditor's trust and the treasurer's trust. These are funds that are basically held for other taxing entities or other operations of the county. Next, page 23 through 62 are the footnotes to the financial statements. So the footnotes include summaries of accounting policies and procedures, detailed information on your debt service, capital asset purchases, depreciation, detailed information on your investments. All that kind of stuff is contained in the footnotes. A lot of detailed information in there, a lot of good reading in those pages. And then behind there's some required supplementary information on page 62 through.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
At the bottom of 61, and this goes to the finding because it's always fascinated me. We get a clean report. However, the very bottom says the annual covered payroll is $48 million. The unfunded actuarial accrued is $9.2 million. Which is 19% of our payroll.
Right.
If we have an unfunded, how do we get a clean audit, I guess, is kind of from a governmental standard. Because 20% of an actuarial unfunded kind of seems.
So, yeah, that's a good question. So, note 11 is your other post-employment benefits. And so this is your retiree health insurance and those kinds of things. And so, let me flip back here to.
Right, which in essence, we have 27, 28, I can't remember the last report, of eligible retirees.
Correct.
So in other words, if they all retired literally today that are eligible, we would owe roughly some portion of that, a large portion of that.
That's correct. But the county actually has earmarked funds for that. So,
Okay.
so unlike other governments, by the way, I'd like to say that other governments haven't funded that liability. It's just sitting there. It's a pay-as-you-go. That's how most entities do it, is a pay-as-you-go system. The state has some regulations on how much you have to set aside for those kinds of things. But the county actually has set aside enough money for that. But
then how
it's
come
not in a
considered
separate
unfunded?
trust. And so the way to make it to show that it's funded, that money actually gets set aside, into a separate trust account and managed by basically an outside entity. So the county has the funds set aside. They're just managing them themselves.
Okay.
So, although,
That's
so
why it shows
accounting
unfunded.
lingo, basically. So it is funded, but unfunded based on accounting regulations.
Is that all, I mean, you're talking about retirement on this, but, what about some, sick leave? The payout, I mean, some of those are not funded, we don't have earmarks on those.
Yeah, so you have,
Those are unfunded as far as I'm seeing.
some of those are unfunded, and
So the bulk of them probably we have earmarked and funded, but there's a few
yeah,
that
yeah,
are
there's
not.
about, I can't remember the number right offhand, and it's not included in these United States, but I
Yeah,
think
and
it's
that-
like 2.5 million or 3 million of about a
That
potential
was my other
$4.6
question,
million
because I didn't see it
liability.
in there. That was why I was curious why that doesn't show up in our financials.
Yeah, so on page 49, if you look at the bottom of page 49, this is your long-term liabilities. And you'll see the compensated absences, which is essentially that's sick leave. And that's potentially $4.6 million. I can't remember the number that you have set aside, but I think it's like 2.5 or $2.8 million, I believe. Of that has been earmarked already. The $9.2 million has been earmarked for the OPEB liability. So there is some unfunded. A lot of that compensated absences liability has accruals that people just may take during the year anyway, and you're going to pay those salaries regardless because they're taking vacation time. You're going to pay that liability, so it's not an additional cost. So from a practical standpoint, the funding that you have set aside is probably pretty good, considering you're well over half set aside, and the rest of it potentially could be absorbed just on your regular payroll anyway. And that's how most of it's going to be
In your
anyway.
regular budget year.
Yeah, in your budget year, it's just vacation that people are taking. So,
Mr. Chairman, just, and correct me if I'm wrong, James, on this, but also in answer to Commissioner Graves' question about how we get an unmodified opinion, yet we have these unfunded things. The opinion is really stating that we are fairly presenting the financial position of the county. Within that presentation, you do have these other things, but that's really what the external auditors do, is make sure that we are presenting things so that all the stakeholders, i.e. the taxpayers, know that all the information here is straightforward, and they're verifying that that is the case with that unmodified opinion.
and that is true. For instance, on that unfunded liability of $9.2 million, it's being presented as unfunded, even though you really have money set aside.
Yeah.
So, because that's the correct way to report it. Going forward in the financial statements, page 63 through 71 are required supplementary disclosures, have to do with your county's road system, detailed information on the major special revenue funds, budget actual have to be reported, and then some additional information regarding the GASB 68 disclosures, which are your allocable portion of the Utah State Retirement System's unfunded liability. So, and that's a big liability. So, I don't know if you remember a few years ago we started reporting that, and it's basically the state has this unfunded liability, which is calculated based upon they have a certain amount of assets, they have a certain amount of retirees, a certain amount of people dying, a certain amount of people coming on board. Actuaries figure out that they have assets set aside of a certain amount, and then they have a liability of something, and that's an unfunded portion. Utah's better than any other state in the union, but there is still an unfunded liability. Well, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board decided that that liability should not only be reported at the state level, but we should push it down to everybody who participates in that multi-employer plan. So based upon participation, how many people are in the system, et cetera, that liability gets pushed down to your financial statements and there's a big liability sitting on the books for that. That's something you shouldn't actually ever have to pay, but again, if the whole world came to an end, that might be the case. But because you actually do pay every single dollar you're required to pay. Utah has a setup, everybody pays what they're supposed to pay. If they don't pay, they get fined big time, and they get it out of them. So everybody pays the amount they should. But there is this actuarially determined unfunded liability. And the net pension liability the county's portion of it is $34 million. So that's on page 13. You can see that liability. So it's a big number. Bigger the entity, the bigger the number. Smaller the entity, the smaller the number. But again, that's a number that you don't have to budget for. You just budget to pay your retirement system or retirement payments like you should. And then behind there, starting on page 72.
Can I just
sure.
ask you one question on 71?
Huh?
This is the one that doesn't make sense to me on the reporting. I understand that this is an expense page, but I don't remember seeing the collection of the TRT and the TRCC. So I understand why, because I believe we, in our TRT, collected just over 4 million during last year and roughly 10 million in the TRCC. And so with our expenditures that showed there, it doesn't have a fund balance, if you will.
Yeah.
And so I just wondering.
So this particular page is only required by the state of Utah.
Okay.
So it's just another supplementary schedule, and it only includes the expenditure portion. And so the actual TRT funds and those funds are included on. They're actually a couple of pages to the the next couple of pages. Page 71 and 72 include those funds, and you'll see the fund balances are included on there. In those, it's a really hard to read.
They are. They're tiny.
You need a giant magnifying glass for that. That's what happens when you have that many.
And I have about the biggest iPad they make, I think.
So yeah, that 71 is only just supplemental disclosures required by the state of Utah. So. So if you look at the farther right, furthest right column on Fund 73, or on page 73, you'll see you've got the transit room tax and the TRCC tax, and you'll see that those fund balances are down there, 681,000 and 11 million in the TRCC. So that's where this fund balancer is being accounted for. And with that, you'll see that these two financial statements, this really small ones you can't read, they're the ones that sum up to go to the financial statements in the front for the non-major funds. Behind there are all kinds of budget actual schedules for each of the individual non-major funds. The internal service funds are back on page 91 and 92. That's the motor pool, jail kitchen, telephone, radio, building maintenance, and information systems. Those columns sum up again to go to the front of the financial statements. And then behind there, starting on page 98 all the way to the end, are supplemental statistical sections. These actually aren't required by required disclosures for the basic financial statements, but they're included in a comprehensive annual financial report, which you have here. And so lots of good statistical data, 10-year information for all kinds of things, revenues, expenditures, tax collections, lots of good information back there that you can go over. Any other questions on the financial statements? All right, so then you've got the smaller packet is the single audit and compliance reports. So this is associated, there's three reports in here. One is the compliance with major program expenditures for federal grants. The other one is compliance with laws and regulations for the federal government. The other one is compliance with laws and regulations for the state government. Again, the county received the highest opinion you can receive on those compliance reports also. Included in here also on page 1 through 5 is a schedule of all your federal grants. You can go through there and you can see that the total federal funds received and expended during the year at the county was about $15.8 million. The largest share of it is $8.2 million, which is your WIC program. And then Health and Human Services, I think, accounts for about $5 million. And then we've got a lot of other grants in there, but largest is certainly the WIC program. Then we do have some recommendations, suggestions on some of your internal control structures and some other items. We have a management letter that we'll be going over in the exit conference with the commissioners. So, any other questions?
Thank you.
Great, appreciate it. I'm available anytime. If you have any questions or concerns, you may call or email me. So,
perfect. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I just add that based upon some of the timing of getting information out of the system, that a lot of congratulations and thank you should go to various departments, IT, HR, our Chief Financial Officer, Deneen Jackson, in conjunction with James's team in pulling all that together to meet our statutory deadline. And I know that at times it was kind of stressful getting some of that information on a timely basis, but everybody stepped up to the plate and really appreciate all those efforts in pulling that together. So that needs to be noted in the record.
Yeah, I would concur with that too. Everybody did a great job pulling everything together. We go out all over the county. We're talking to all kinds of all the departments, all kinds of people, and they're very helpful getting the information we need. Sometimes they have no idea why we want that information, but they're willing to get it for us, and we can be kind of a pain sometimes, even though we try not to be. But anyway, they do a great job, and yeah, pulling together a document this size and trying to get all the financial numbers together is quite a bit of work, and your people do a really good job. So, thank you.
All right, I can entertain a motion.
I'll move.
Do we do a motion on
We have
this?
to-
Just a
we have to
presentation?
accept
right?
it.
Accept the presentation. Dave?
Just to accept it, as long as it's reflected in the minutes, I think that's fine.
Okay. I'll make a motion that we accept the presentation.
Second.
A motion and a second to accept the presentation. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion will carry 3-0. Next, we have regular agenda item number 11. This is to take action, to consider and take action to approve or deny a request by Rocky Mountain University on a reduced rent. Is there anyone here to speak to that?
Victor Morris is our foundation director at RMU and is passing you a hard copy so that the public can also see the presentation on the board. Anyway, I'm grateful for this opportunity. I've been involved with Rocky Mountain as the chairman of the foundation, and over the 8 years, not only have we witnessed tremendous growth, but as you know, we're now in the process of completing acquisition, and we just hired a dean to create a new medical school on the frontage of the East Bay Golf Course, building 3 new holes on the back side. So we're grateful for the growth of this particular establishment and what it's going to do for this county. I don't think people realize that having a medical university, is next to Huntsman, and the university, it's going to be a shining jewel in this county for decades and century to come. And so we're very grateful for that, and I've been able to see the growth of Rocky Mountain University and the foresight of our President Nelson and Mike Surgica, the 2 founders. We're grateful for this opportunity because we're here to help people. We're here to make people whole, and especially those who are underserved, those who are low income, some of the homeless, and some things that are not in our presentation here is that we've acquired an agreement with the Boys and Girls Club, who basically are very low income and underserved people, to participate and to help 10,000 members of the Boys and Girls Club, which I'm also on the foundation with, to be able to make sure that they have proper rehab and clinical opportunities to be able to get better and to be functional in the community and their jobs, and young people going back to school. If you go to that first slide, promoting service and changing lives. The mission of the CRC is to improve the quality of life, function, employability, and facilitate independence of underserved and uninsured patients treated at the clinic. Just some, if you take a look at the healthcare services provided, just give a minute for that to look, but you can see it's orthopedic, post-surgical, balance and vestibule, chronic pain rehabilitation. We're one of the few clinics who has a PhD, Master Neurological PT in Dr. Nielsen. And of course, the electroneuromyography, the pediatric physical therapy. We've taken over the county, used to participate with several patients at the other rehab center, and we've now taken over the multiple sclerosis, which I'm very close to. I've been involved 40 years with them because my brother and who hasn't passed away, but my aunt and my cousin did, because of excruciating pain and debilitating, and looked like they were Auschwitz patients, you know, unfortunately, when they died. So it's a very insidious disease. We've been serving the community, if you'll go on to the next, serving the community. We started out very small, just putting kind of our feet in the water, taking a look to see what we could do as a fully certified, we are fully certified just as Brigham Young, University of Utah, UVU, and accredited by the Northwestern Association. We now have served almost 1,000 patients, over 6,000 treatments. And if that was to be paid for by Mountain Land or anyone else, it has been a benefit to our entire county and to those underserved of over $1 million. If you take a look at the cost per patient of $54 for evaluations and their treatments, at the normal, evaluation in a private practice is $220, and if you're an inpatient facility, it's $390 per visit. So that is a savings of almost 450%. The patient outcomes and utilization, we're very proud of this. 88% compared to the national average of 50%. We're 10% above the national average in patient treatment and effectiveness. 97.3% patient satisfaction rating, and an average of 8 patient visits discharged versus 12 national results in savings of $541 per patient episode. We have a tremendous volunteer support from our local universities, including Rocky Mountain University and our graduate programs, which we only do master's and doctorate programs, and also BYU and UVU students. Gives them a wonderful opportunity to be able to see if they want to continue on into health sciences and become a professional in health sciences when they graduate from the distinguished universities in our valley. The patient success, Cody is just one of the multitude of people. I won't go read this, but I can just tell you that this young man was ambulatory, had no opportunity, nothing was happening with him. And thanks to our full staff and secondary staff and our university getting involved, he's had incredible results, and he's functioning, as a father, with 2 children and his beautiful wife. And we have many, hundreds that we put back to work, and stuff, and have been viable in their communities. So you take a look at the vision and the needs we talk about as we have grown, meet the demand for physical therapy services from low income and underserved, provide the high quality patient care that you've seen, create a service learning and clinical education environment for university students and faculty. And so we have many crossovers that we do with both the nursing programs and physical therapy programs that are involved at BYU and University and Utah Valley University. Our present lease is around $32,000 per year. If abated, could provide treatment for an additional 600 patients visits per year through increased staffing. CRC is on track for 2,500 patient visits in 2018. If you take a look at we want to maximize this, and the way we're maximizing this, if we were open 6 days a week and 60 hours, we would be able to have 219 patient visits per week, and it would be 10,950 patient treatments per year in a 50-week year. We're grateful for those. Just so you know, we're not only here requesting you. The university itself, our large donors, the university contributes $50,000 in untold man hours. Also, we pay all of the insurance, in case there was any type of malpractice, so you don't have to worry about that. We have some of our great people in our area, and even one company or even one foundation that's headed in Washington, but the young lady attended the university here, Kahlert Foundation, that now has donated $100,000 and giving $30,000 per year. The Norda Foundation donated, $50,000 and committed $30,000 to $50,000 per year for the next 3 to 4 years. They see the growth of what's happened since we began just as a small outpatient clinic, and now have grown into something using the full facilities over there by Mountain Land. Zions Bank, we're very appreciative of Utah County, Orem, and Provo cities, Rocky Mountain Power, Eldridge, Sunset, and IHC themselves, who sends us patients. So we're very grateful for all that opportunity. There is one little question I had, and we were kind of putting in, I noticed item 18 was about $25,000 of the grant, giving us $25,000 toward that. We were actually asking for the full $32,000, you know, and I'm still asking the commission to consider that. Paying $7,000 equals out to about, you know, 175 patients, you know, and stuff, and full treatments. And we have patient loads just coming right to us right now. It's a very heavy, a lot of need in our community. As you know, the county has been growing, you know, leaps and bounds. And so we have more people from outreach, from Lehigh down to Payson, you know, Santaquin, that are coming into the facility and that, and many of the cities. And many of the doctors don't want, especially in the orthopedic sense, we have several large orthopedics groups that are involved in Utah County. And I'm involved, as Richard will know, I've been involved with, the Jacksons have 28 orthopedic surgeons, you know, in their practice, and they've come to me asking about, you know, if they can refer some of their underserved, underprivileged, in addition to the services that we get from Mountainland. And we've reassured them that we will take care of their patients, as we have done with some of IHC at the hospital and that. So there's a greater need than is what here. We're so grateful that we can serve these people, and we're just asking your assistance in this, that if this money for the lease is abated, we are able to, you know, increase, you know, 600, 700, 800 patients, you know, and stuff in their treatments, and it really means a lot. So I'm hoping that you'll approve this, and line item 18, you will approve the full $32,000 and not $25,000. So any questions that myself or Vic Morris, who's our director, that we can answer for you?
No, just so you know, 18 was approved on consent, and those come in as block grants from them, so
Okay.
we can't actually go back and amend that.
Okay.
That would need to-
Okay.
Just a clarification, that item is for a new clinic that we've also started, the Center for Communication Disorders, and that's the one we're working with Mountain Association of Governments with. So it's one that's just getting started, like we did the CRC, like the CRC. And
4
we
years
hope
ago.
to, you know, make this a very viable clinic just like that, but treating kids with autism and things of that nature.
Yeah, we did want to, and I confused that. I want to make sure that now that's separate, it's a separate entity, you know, and stuff. And we're very proud of that. That's just, we had an open house, invited everyone. And I think Commissioner Lee attended that particular event, you know, last month in June. And so we have a lot of growth coming. You got to realize that when we open our doors for our medical school in 2021, by 2024, we will have 840 medical students, you know, going through their freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior year, and they'll be there every year. We'll have a faculty and staff employing almost 2,000 people, and I think you're going to see East Bay, you know, change its whole, you know, culture of how it looks now compared to what it will be in the future. And you're just participating because that, one of the things that we want to do there is we're going to increase our clinical resources for the underserved and everything also at the same time, and we'll be able to include, you know, junior and senior medical students, you know, so we'll be able to take a lot more underserved and low income and homeless people, you know, to be able to do actual, you know, more than just physical therapy, you know, in that capacity. So just so you know that. Anyway.
I appreciate you coming. I remember when you first presented this to all the mayors and the commissioners at that meeting a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And I'm glad to see this coming full circle. Much
Yeah.
needed, and we appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. I think if you see the growth, it's been pretty incredible, you know, and stuff. And I'm proud of Rocky Mountain, and Dr. Nelson and Victor's done a great job as the director. And I'm just looking forward to the future and what we can do, you know, for services in medical and physical therapy for our community. So.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
Yeah.
It's been an interesting journey, kind of going back and forth. It's been kind of on and off the agenda now for quite some time. A couple of things I wanted to point out. We spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, even millions of dollars through TRCC, TRT tax on parks and rec and in kind of promoting healthy lifestyles and so forth. We also support the Veterans Association with, you know, right here in the building next door.
Right.
To, you know, we give them a rent-free a place that they can be at, and they do a fantastic job. I've heard on a national level from some of the organizations that are impressed with what they're doing here in the county. And so, in looking down through this myself and trying to find and tie it all up, you know, the different areas that it seems to hide and move back and forth. I'm in favor of moving forward with something like this too, because the benefits that can happen in our community are just astounding. I know that IHC and others, you know, if they don't land in places where we can take care of them on a minimal basis, they wind up in our emergency rooms that cost us a lot of money, and
Right.
and it's all of us that bears that burden to a certain extent too, through charity or whatever the case may be. So I'm in favor of moving forward with this, and hopefully this will be something that we can look at. There are costs. I was talking with Richard just this morning. You know, I mean, there are costs with parking lots. There are costs with roofs and chillers. Now the building, I know you went through a renovation just recently. Was it a couple of years ago or last year? I can't remember now. And just kind of on the inside, and you
Right.
paid for all that,
Right.
to take place, and some carpet probably.
We were
too.
able to.
Which the county will inherit once we leave.
Yeah, we had and they will, and we used we're continually going out after foundations, you know, and stuff like that. I mean, I just want to commend the Norda Foundation. I mean, they are in heavy skin in the new medical school. You know, they've paid for 50%, you know, of the medical school, because, you know, that was Ray and his wife's vision, you know, was to give back to this community. And a large portion of their foundation has gone to make sure that this medical school and this incredible new dean that we've got, that's very, very highly thought of around the country, is coming, you know, to this area and put his imprint on building this a beautiful medical school, you know, and stuff, and making it so it's a great legacy. And not only that, but it graduates incredible doctors for the future.
I might just mention one thing. I appreciate that, and I appreciate your prayer, which really focused on those that are underserved, and that's our intent. We really want to help the underserved in this community. And, you know, the rent that we're paying is the largest part of our budget. And by an abatement of that, we can add some more staff that we can bring in and treat more new patients. And so that's where we're talking about the 600 additional patient treatments. We'll be able to add staff to be able to do that, increase our patient load, and maximize our capacity. So that's kind of where we're at. So, and I think you're right. Once they end up over at IHC, you know, the costs go up, you know, dramatically. And so we're trying to save costs all the way around.
And every foundation clinic that's run in the state of Utah, it's imperative and it's required by law that, you know, we use our graduate, you know, and our PhD faculty and master's faculty that, you know, overlook the clinic, but, you know, they have to be insured, and you have to have them, you know, on the staff to be able to get that insurance, and those are the only people that are paid. All of these other people, we have one secretary, you know, that is paid at full time, and then the couple of staff members, and we have all the secondary, you know, graduate students, all of the, you know, UVU and BYU students, you know, who are going into healthcare, you know, coming over, and not one of them are paid, and I'm not paid, you know, so, you know, and I'm the most valuable player, but, you know, it's okay, so. I'm the guy that sticks his foot in the mud and is willing to, you know, pull it back out and draw a line and say, okay, let's wrestle. So anyway, and I think in this case, we're all here for the same thing. We even have a couple of the other foundations that are providing transportation for some of these patients, especially MS patients who are required, you know, to have ambulatory, you know, type of vehicles to be able to move them back and forth. So.
Perfect. We sure appreciate you.
Okay.
We'll go ahead and entertain a motion this time. If there's no additional comment.
I will move that we approve the request of Rocky Mountain University as stated in number 11.
And that's to abate.
Yes.
You probably should put that.
We would need to know the amount that's being abated. You need to make a finding also with regard to the benefit community outweigh.
The amounts, the $32,384 per year.
Okay, and then we would have to do an amended lease that
will
will come back on the agenda.
Okay.
Well,
yeah. Okay, I will move then that we approve the Rocky Mountain University of Health Professionals reduced rent of $32,384 per year, with the finding that the benefit to the community is far outweighed by the rental costs.
And I'll second that.
I have a motion and a second to approve regular agenda item number 9 with the notations.
11.
Or excuse me, 11 with the notations. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That will carry 3-0. Thank you. We'll now look at regular agenda item number 12. This is to look at potentially adopting a resolution amending the Utah County Human Resource Department rules and regs, specifically in relationship to benefits for survivors. And we'll turn, Rob, do you want to briefly cover this one for us? Or Elena, either one?
So this potential modification to our HR rules relates to what happens upon the death of an employee. Currently, of a death of an employee, for by any reason, that employee's spouse can and children may be able to have some additional benefits. I think we've talked about those in the past, recent past. This potential change today would differentiate a line of duty death from, for lack of a better term, a regular death for county employees. So an officer who's involved in a line of duty death, as has been defined by us and partially following the state statute, would be entitled to that same benefit. It would remove the remarriage requirement, or the remarriage, not requirement, remarriage obstacle, if you will, that is currently in there for both spouse and children. So the change would be that if an officer was unfortunately killed in a line of duty death, that his spouse, irrespective of whether they get remarried or not, would be covered until the age of 65. Also, their children would be covered until the age of 21, irrespective of whether they get married or not.
So my only question is, and when we approved this the first time, I asked that we would go back and review this, so I'm so happy to see this. But I did ask the question at the time, why not 26 years old for kids versus 21, since with the ACA changing the requirement that kids can stay on there until 26 for health insurance, why would we not extend the same for a death benefit or some sort of health benefit?
Well, I'll just say it's up to you, but let me address that.
I think originally this benefit was kind of a parallel to or a substitute for Social Security survivor benefits. And in most cases, those survivor benefits cut off at age 18. And so I think we said 23 originally. Anyway, it was a little bit of a compromise to give a little more than age 18, but you know, not really to parallel the health insurance laws, but the Social Security laws.
Hopefully we never have to use this one again, but I appreciate this change.
Some questions that I have with when it comes to this. I always just philosophically hate it when government has disincentivizes through some sort of policies or procedures remarriage. You know, I just think that that's terrible. When you have policies in place that it seems like it's easier for us to stay single and receive benefits than it is for us to get married. I just, that always rubs me the wrong way. And so, and this one has a little bit of that ability to it, where it feels that way, where there's actually a question of, oh, should we wait? Should I not get married now, later? How's this gonna work? So philosophically, that's always bothered me. But there's two parts to the line of duty, and I'm a little bit concerned that we're splitting it in half. Where we're saying line of duty only means this, and it doesn't mean this. And that kind of bothers me. It bothers me that we're saying we're gonna accept this type of line of duty, but not the other side of line of duty. So how do we get,
could you maybe give an example of where?
Well, read the whole thing then, Rob, on.
Well, I don't have the whole statute you're talking about. So
I agree.
We've
speaking this, I could maybe reference this specific section. The subsection applies to line of duty death resulting from external force, violence, or disease occasioned by an act of a duty as a public safety service employee.
And that's
yeah, so one I think what Commissioner Lee's addressing is in the state statute, that language you just read was borrowed from state statute defining line of duty death. That's part A. There is a part B, and part B suggests that, you know, a line of duty death also would include someone who maybe has a heart attack or something as they are in the line of duty. So has not been included here. We can include that if you'd like to, but it was not included in this draft.
Or the other thing, as you point out about the marriage issue, that is the main distinction between these two new sections now, and you could consider taking the remarriage provision out of the other one as well. It's a little bit of an antiquated idea that when you get remarried, somebody else is going to take care of you, I guess. But
well, not only that, the problem is once that happens, and let's say the marriage fails or their spouse were to pass away, we don't go back and reinstate this 2 years later, 5 years later, or whatever. And that's kind of the downside, like Commissioner Lee's saying, you know.
Well, and that's really, in my mind, a whole nother issue. There are, you know, typically, this isn't really an insurance benefit. If it were, you'd have, you know, pages and pages of what if this scenario, what if that scenario. And I will say, of the 5 or 6 families that we are paying some of these benefits to currently, we've had all kinds of situations arise that are not addressed as to how do we handle this. You know, what if there are children, but they're living with an ex-spouse in a different home? Are you paying part to each family, or does it all go to the spouse? You know, what if it's a stepchild that this employee was raising, but it's not a biological child? And so there are a lot of things that could be fleshed out, I guess, into how this benefit should work, but because it's more a pay practice and not a benefit per se, you have a lot of discretion as to how you structure it and to what degree you define it. But that would be another option, is just to take out the remarriage endpoint on both sides. But right now, on the non-line of duty death, if the spouse gets remarried, the benefit would stop. It doesn't say, you know, if we're paying 40% because there were a spouse and children and the spouse gets remarried, do we continue to pay anything to the children? It doesn't really address that. Also, the current benefit talks about unmarried children under 21, and, you know, so if you have a child who gets married before 21, that cuts off the children's portion, but then do we still pay the spouse? And, you know, so.
Lena, the more you talk, the more you're confusing me.
I'm telling you, I'm just saying there are a lot of unanswered questions.
And I think that we need to find a process with this. I mean, you can always run all kinds of scenarios. What if, you know, like I had a sister, her husband passed away very early in their marriage, and now she's remarried, and, you know, everything's going along. But that first 5 or 6 years was pretty tough.
Right.
And now, if that would have been the case in something like this, that she would have had that benefit all the way till 65. That's interesting. It would be kind of interesting to look and see. I mean, it is a benefit. We have to kind of count it as a certain benefit there. So.
And the Social Security law still has some remarriage provisions in it, but they have a lot of exceptions. If you're over 60, you can get remarried and not lose a benefit. And so, you know, there's a lot of different ways you could.
So I obviously don't disagree, since I brought this up a few months ago with Commissioner Lee's discussion. I think what I'd like to do, in keeping consistent with what we did, I guess my recommendation would be that we approve number 5, but continue to work on that other and make the whole, you know, whatever we'd like. So we're addressing stepchildren, it's defined, you know, the marriage for everybody.
That second half.
Yes.
Yeah, so we were asked to draft this at this point.
Right.
So we did. We acknowledge that there are some other issues, and if you want to address those issues, we can do that. The intent of this draft, it was to, again, remove the marriage prohibition on line of duty death, and that's what we did. If you want to change
line of
it
duty
anyway,
is defined by state code, not
by
us.
state code as we've adopted part of that state code, not all of it. In this draft, again, this is just what we were told to bring forward to you guys. If you like a different version of that, we can change it. If this is satisfactory, you can approve it. I think it's a benefit to law enforcement officers.
Well, like I say, I would like to see us add that right now and continue to work on it and fix that other, because I agree, the other half is.
And this is a benefit to the county employees as well, because, again, we're not in Social Security.
Right.
And this is kind of meant to be that replacement of that. So.
Is there any reason why we couldn't just add the whole thing in today?
Add the whole state statute, or
talking about both sides of the line of
Oh, we
duty
certainly could
being
go
it.
through that.
We could add in the full definition of line of duty if you'd like us to. That's easily done. If you wanted to go with what Lena said and just take out the remarriage, on,
for the
on
other.
anybody, then we would not have two separate sections. We would just have a modification of the first section.
Oh, I see.
Which would just apply to everybody in the county employment.
Okay.
Yeah.
We could do that too. Whatever your pleasure is, what we would do.
I can speak specifically kind of why I like this with the marriage separation, recognizing I agree that we shouldn't disincentivize people being married. For me, if someone dies, you know, accidentally, a heart attack, something, it's a grievance, it's a hardship, but the life wasn't necessarily taken as a result of their employment. In the specific instance of a line of death duty, that life has been taken because of their service. And so I feel, for me, there's a distinction there with the marriage component, right?
Okay.
Because that was for me where I saw a distinction in drawing between, man, it's terrible that your spouse died, we're going to help you through a period until you're remarried and back on with life. Whereas in this instance, this individual has put their life on the line in public service and protection, and it's been taken. And as a result, I felt like we had maybe a greater obligation to that family long-term for the service of that individual. So that's where I saw the difference in the particular marriage component of it for me. In the benefit side of it, we certainly could look at adopting the whole state statute. The question becomes, if you're chasing a bad guy and you have a heart attack, was that heart attack a result of chasing the bad guy, or just because you're going to have a heart attack running and chasing your kid at the park the next day, right? I mean, those, again, I think I see those as more an instance, a death like that, more as kind of a natural occurrence, not necessarily something that was a direct result of your work activity.
Yeah. And maybe just to, as we have that discussion, a death and how it affects the family, no matter how it happens, it seems like it's still a death, and it's still going to affect the family.
Right.
If this is a benefit that we're wanting to give to the employees, then I personally don't really care which way the death comes. I mean, one way seems like, wow, that's unbelievable that happened, but it still affects the family and those that are surviving, and that's the part where it doesn't matter to me if it goes one way or the other.
See, and it doesn't to me particularly, because here's the reality. This is the other part that bothers me. Our average employee wages, let's just say they're $60,000 for the people who die, right? 40% of that isn't a livable wage at $24,000 a year. So we're not talking a huge amount of money. That's the other problem to me, is it's like 40% to try and live and support a family, even though those kids they have 6 kids. It's not like we're talking a lot, because our also thing says those 6 kids are dividing 20%. So 3.5% of $60,000 isn't a lot of money either. So, you know, oh, your dad has died, and let's say he was the only source of income. Oh, great, she's got $24,000, and those kids are splitting $12,000 themselves. That's not still, you know, very much, but I guess it follows Social Security, which is right.
Sort of, and there may, in many cases, be a URS benefit also, depending how long he was in the URS system and in law enforcement.
Here's my other question on this. So when we do a COLA, because Social Security does do COLAs, or, you know, but I don't see any mention of that where, because of the cost of living increase, that we increase the benefit. Seems like we freeze it.
The benefit is based on pay at the time of the death, which it does say that much, but it doesn't provide
I'd like
for
to
any
see us add that
increases after
component
the
to
fact.
it as well. To me, I'd like to see us go back, and again, I'd like to accept this so we have something, regardless of what it is, whether we remove the remarriage altogether today or just the line of duty, or even remove the remarriage and still keep a line of duty, because that way it's outlined, you know. But I would like to see us go back and add the cost of living, so anytime that a cost of living is accepted by the commission for countywide, we also increase these benefits, because we only increase it based on the real need or the real increase. And to me, that would be
I guess then the question would be, would we like to just go ahead and strike the remarriage provision?
I think that would, does that kind of fulfill both sides of it? If we just strike the remarriage provision on
That's
it?
the only real distinction between the two
That's
sides.
the only distinction.
Currently.
So why don't we just strike that? And I,
Marriage and marriage for children.
Right.
That is,
Yes.
Yeah.
it's both tied to
So,
marriage.
right, so we strike the remarriage for the adult and surviving adult spouse, and with the children, they're good till they're 21.
Period. Yeah.
So I think that's a pretty simple modification then.
Okay, so we would not be adding this provision, we would just be modifying the previous one mentioned, which would bring those back. Okay.
Right.
strike the remarriage part.
So we'd strike sub 5 completely back out, and we'll just get rid of the remarriage.
So, any thoughts on the COLA?
Well, I agree with the COLA one.
Yeah.
I think the COLA one should be put into.
And
I
we
think that should be a part of it.
Add that provision that the.
So then, based on employees at the end of that, after the colon, or maybe we separate that at the time the commission approves a COLA for all county employee, we add that portion.
My suggestion is I bring this back in 2 weeks with
Okay.
all those changes.
Okay.
Well, it's all written up, we
So
can see
it's
it.
clear,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
The
And
other,
we apply it to.
yeah, that's the other issue that we needed to address was retroactive effect, if you want that to occur or not. Right now, we have 6 people currently on.
Sounds about right, 5
on
or
this,
6.
With one, if we had done line of duty, we'd have one on that.
One retro for only a couple months, though.
But we may have somebody we've taken off because of a remarriage, so we
That's
have
the
to-
question. Do you
Oh,
want-
so you're saying you make it go back years?
Do you want to, or do you want to
Theoretically,
just
I
say
mean,
it starts
I would
tomorrow,
just,
or next time?
well, if you start tomorrow, then you miss the.
I guess
We should
that
have
gives
that
us 2
discussion.
weeks to think about what's
Yeah.
the right thing to do,
Exactly.
so.
And I can look and see, what situations.
Or you can go
we
retro
actually
back
have.
to a certain date if you'd like.
Yeah.
So,
You missed
do
by
we,
one day, I'm sorry.
so Rob, do we need to strike this because you're gonna amend it, or because it's amended, can we continue it as it is?
Just continue it for 2 weeks,
Okay.
be fine.
I will move that we continue item 12 for 2 weeks.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to continue item number 12 for 2 weeks. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion will carry 3-0.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have regular agenda item number 16. I believe the question was potentially amending this to July 31st as the date to open this, and we wanted to look to our clerk auditor division to see if that would be a possibility.
So you want to accelerate it to July 31st?
The public hearing portion,
The
because
public
then
hearing.
the adoption would be August 7th.
The one drawback we do have is preparation of the schedules for that hearing, and our chief financial officer, after putting in months and long hours, is on a well-deserved vacation through the 27th.
Okay.
And
So
so,
you do need the time.
so we need the time.
Okay. And that was the primary question on that one. Okay. I will entertain a motion then.
I'll make a motion that we set a date, time, and location for a public hearing to discuss and amend the increasing the 2018 Utah County budget in the county's general fund and various other budgetary funds suggested at Tuesday, August 7th, 2018 at 9 a.m. in this room.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve regular agenda item number 16. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion will carry 3-0. Next up, we had a question, we have a discussion for number 20. This is to discuss and approve or deny a sales tax protest filed by Telden Wiseman related to a particular serial parcel. We'll turn time to Bert and Paul to introduce this one.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Board of Commissioners. I would like to recommend a course of action. Of course, the discretion is yours. I would suggest that Mr. Harvey kind of give the board a quick rundown of the actions that were taken in the sale of this parcel. And then perhaps the interested people, maybe we could just check really quickly if Mr. Wiseman is here.
He's right here.
Right there. And Mr. Burnett, right there. I would suggest that Mr. Harvey give you a quick factual rundown, the parties address you if they would like to, and then I'd like to give you my recommendation, and then after that, hear from whoever you'd like, I guess.
Sounds good.
Sorry, hang on. Just trying to drag this up. Okay.
Bert Harvey, Clerk Auditor's Office. I'm the administrator of the tax sale. So just a quick rundown. This first protest was filed by Mr. Tilden Wiseman. If I could, okay, I don't have that. Let me pull that other one. Let me show you the parcel in question. Go ahead and pull this up there. So this is the piece. So this piece that's highlighted here in red is the piece that was actually sold to the tax sale. Mr. Wiseman owns the property next to it. As far as the facts of how this ended up on the tax sale is probably really, I don't know if it's totally relevant at this point, but to give you a rundown of what the county did in preparation to sell this piece, come on.
So, can I just kind of, I hate to stop you from your presentation.
No, go ahead.
But since we've kind of done this before, I guess my question is, we see these strips all the time.
Yes.
And we go out of our way to sell them for very little money, contacting each of the homeowner, whichever side it affects.
Right.
And basically sell it for whatever the cost was, the inconvenience, the staff time, whatever, right?
Yes.
My other question is to you that I'd like to answer is last year we had a fairly large one that we claimed a notice thing and stuff like that.
That was a couple of years ago, but yeah.
Right, okay, 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But that person wasn't necessarily willing, and we have now somebody willing to come and make good on it and says they're unaware of, and again, a title error that we, again, the county's not held harmless, or not held the harm for that, but
right.
I guess my question is why wouldn't we just refund that money, or did we make such a significant money? I guess are the questions I'd really like you to address.
That's a great question. Really, from the county standpoint, of course, our purpose of the tax sale is really just to collect the taxes. We don't care how, where, why, as long as we fulfill the government requirement, the statutory requirement necessary to sell the piece. We're happy to collect those taxes either from the original owner, from a neighboring owner, or from the person who purchased the tax sale. So, in terms of should we reverse this sale, I think that discretion is definitely left up to the commission. From my standpoint, we took the steps necessary to notify. In the case of Mr. Wiseman, this address is actually, I believe, Mr. Wiseman's address. So we sent both certified notices originally to Mr. Wiseman, and then I sent him a neighbor notice letting him know, hey, this was coming up on tax sale, and informing him of the process of preferred bidder status. And I believe I included a preferred bidder application. So if he had responded before the sale, it's likely we probably would have been able to grant him an opportunity to buy it at the sale exclusively. But because that didn't happen and we felt that we'd met the notice requirements, we went ahead and sold it. Now, as to the circumstances of how this ended up not in his name and was left in the name of the original owners of his home.
I'm also curious what we sold it for.
I believe we just sold this one for the taxes, penalty, and interest owed.
See, and so my understanding at the tax sale, or my opinion, I should say, is that we have a few residents that show up and purposefully try and buy these, and sometimes hold some people hostage in trying to sell it back to them.
I understand that, yeah.
And so here we have a willing homeowner. Again, I understand. I'm not blaming staff. We've gone through the process, right? We're talking over 4 years, before penalty and interest, before administrative fee, $26.48.
$73. It's up there on the.
No. Without penalty and interest.
Oh, I'm sorry, without penalty. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I'm looking at the wrong column.
The actual tax due to the county, had these been paid on time, was $26.48.
Right.
And again, I'm going back to what you stated. You said our only responsibility is to collect the tax. Okay? Right? That's what
our
that's
purpose.
Really...
Yeah, our responsibility and purpose, and through the tax sale is our. Well, I mean, it's to collect the taxes, penalty, and interest, and then whatever fees are required.
Sure.
But yeah.
So I guess I'm tipping my hand at where I definitely stand. And again, I'm not blaming staff. I understand Paul's going to tell me, we did everything right, so therefore deny it. Paul and I often disagree on that, even though he's right legally. I know I have the ability to vote in favor of what I feel is right for this community and to me.
Well, if you don't have any further questions, I'm happy to turn over the mic to Mr. Wiseman and anyone else who's here to,
as far as I'm
to
concerned,
speak to it.
Where
so.
I'm at, he doesn't need to speak because I know where I'm at.
Couple questions for you though, is that with the process that we have in place, if we, because a couple times just hearing that conversation going back and forth, I don't know, there was a certain amount of time in which it almost just alluded to the process is not going to be followed. Because we're going to have to make a judgment on if somebody got the information or if they're, where they're at. And that's where it gets really fuzzy for me, because I don't know where the lines are. It's easier when we know where the lines are as much as possible. Now, we do have discretion to go one way or the other after the lines have been drawn by staff and said, here's where the process is. So that's my ultimate concern is where we're at, what lines have been crossed, have we done the process and appropriately, and if that's the case, then we're going to have to take it from there and look at it and see which is the best course of action after.
Well, as far as the process goes, the statutory requirement is actually fairly low in terms of our responsibility. We take extra steps to ensure that we've done our due diligence. In this case, the main statutory requirement is that we send out a first class and a certified notice to the owner of record at the address of record and anyone who has a recorded interest in the property. Through the research that I did on this property, the only notice that needed to go out was to the owner of record at the address of record, which we did. I sent out, the notice came back unclaimed. Owing to the type of property it was, and there was no other recorded interest on the property, that's where we stopped. As the sale came up, I took the extra step of notifying Mr. Wiseman at his address based on that he was a neighboring notice, and it looked like from the records that it really probably should have been his property. So I took the step to notify him, because obviously the county, we can't arbitrarily change ownership of a property. It has to be done through legal method, and the tax sale presents a legal method to change the ownership. So we took the extra step to send him a neighbor notice, let him know of a process that we adopted in the county that would create a preferred bidder status. I sent him an application. He didn't respond. Because he didn't respond at that time, then we put it up for sale. So I mean, there's just we went through the process and we followed the steps we needed to prepare to make the properties. To sell the property. That includes, of course, putting the newspaper, advertising on the website, making whatever other notifications we need to do. So, in terms of the process, we followed what the statute requires. We went over and above. But owners and anyone, the ordinance really allows anyone to file a protest and make a case before the commission as to why the sale should not be overturned. I mean, the commission ultimately has the ability, and I'll let Paul more speak to the legal side of that, but this is my own understanding, is that the commission really has wide latitude here to accept or reject bids. If they feel that either the process was involved or if there's an overriding public interest or an interest of the county, I believe it's up to the commission to decide if this bid should be ratified.
Let me give you a situation, okay? This isn't even hypothetical.
Okay.
This is real, okay? The problem is our recording team does a great job. But this could be an engineering error. Could be a surveyor. There's so many things on the recording that could have happened, right? So let's say you have a home in Provo that goes into tax sale, okay? But this home, and by the way, this is real. We have multiple properties in Provo that this happens. The defined legal description of the property intersects another home. So somebody has the title deed to their home, but yet there is a property line that goes dead in the middle of their home, and that happens the whole way down the street. So, again, you would follow process, but would you not agree that we should not allow that person that was not at fault to still own their whole home and the side of their property that has a fence boundary but by legal description is an error that they didn't own, that's not their fault, and the title companies have done that?
I don't know how to answer that,
because
Commissioner,
the problem is as a commission, we've always attempted to be very consistent on these,
Yeah.
The problem is if we don't allow him to come back in because of this error, in every one of those homes in Provo, and again, I only know this happened in Provo because I know one of the homeowners that came and they had to go find 5 people all to readjust and sign, and one of those people lived way out of state, and so it hasn't been done. And so if we rule this way to be consistent and treat everybody the same, when that homeowner comes in or is defaulted on the tax sale, all of a sudden they own part of the other person's house. By the way, they don't even own their whole house because the properties are all off so much that they own a portion of the other person's house and not their whole home. So that's the problem I see here, potentially.
And I don't know how to answer that. I mean, obviously, again, my standpoint is, I'm an administrator of the law. My job is to look
Right,
at the
and,
law
and that's why to me,
follow the
that's why the
process,
commission
so.
has the discretion, and
Yeah.
to me, that's where this falls in.
And I
Well, and-
appreciate that. I'd like to actually hear from the people that are here and not keep them waiting forever.
No problem. And one final thought I'd like to, I'll sit down, is I would like to remind the commission that as far as from our standpoint in the auditor's office, we have no ego here. Whatever the commission feels is appropriate, we've done our job, and we feel the commission, whatever decision you make is perfectly legitimate. So, thank you.
So if you'd like to speak to the issue, you bet. Just please state your name for the record.
Yeah, I'm Talbot Wiseman. I live at 2847, and it's my little, well, supposedly my little sliver there highlighted. I mean, what can I say? Like, we wouldn't be here if I would have just answered letters or seen letters, but we also wouldn't be here if the Hansons, who lived at the house before me, by the way, in the slide that you were showing, was actually an invoice addressed to the Hansons, previous owners. Had their title company, when they prepared their selling documents, they had the wrong description of the land, as I'm being told by my title company. So I've reached out to their title company, and we've kind of just barely started the process to do like a warranty deed. Again, pending decision. It's quick and easy, and something that probably should have been caught by their professionals over there. Unfortunately, my title office missed it, and so yada yada yada. 2 years later, here we are.
But Paul, is it still not a federal offense to open somebody else's mail that's addressed to them? I mean, you always hear that, and that's what people say.
And that's why I sure
Right.
didn't.
Because I'm looking at that, and now all of a sudden I'm like, okay, we have a noticing error. The actual owner of property was not the notified owner. Yes, the property of address was, and I know you're going to tell me by statute, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But again,
Well,
I would never open something not addressed to me. I get stuff that's addressed to my cousin all the time. I never open it.
right. I don't think that the county would expect Mr. Wiseman to have opened that mail, but
And how would he know?
right. Well, there's two things there. Number one, Mr. Wiseman is not the property owner. Mr. Hanson was the property owner. So Mr. Wiseman owns the property to the north. And there's I'll call it a sliver there that Mr. Hanson owned, not Mr. Wiseman. And number two, my understanding is that Mr. Harvey sent Mr. Wiseman his own piece of mail addressed to Mr. Wiseman, informing him of the sale of the property next door to him.
That he would see that Mr. Hanson owns a piece of property, so why would he think to respond to that?
Well, the notice that Bert sent him said, hey, there's a property right next to you that abuts your property that's for sale. You may want to take some action. And that was before the sale occurred.
I know what I'd do as a layperson.
That, the sliver now, as we're calling it, Mark probably doesn't know that it's still his. It was probably intended to be included in the sale of the property when we closed in February of 2016.
Sure it is, because you can see the property line on your house, because Lehigh City would never let you build a house literally up to the property line. There's no way. They have an easement. I guarantee they do.
So did you know, when did you know about this issue?
After it was too late.
After what?
After the tax sale.
After
it
the
was
tax
was
sale?
when I initially became aware of, oh my gosh, we missed it. It was literally days after, and then I sprang right to action, wrote my protest frantically.
Is that your understanding as well? That was after the tax sale?
Let's see if this doesn't, oh.
That's not.
Just so it's reporting on the record. Mr. Weissman contacted me. I don't think it was days. I think it was actually the day after the tax sales when he contacted me, and I informed him, yeah, we sold it. And I let him know about the protest process, and so that's when we got this all started.
So he never even had a chance to.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask? Yeah, a follow-up question. We sent a letter, correct?
Yeah.
Mentioning that there was a potential of this. What's the date of that letter? I can't see.
Well, that date is May 1st. I'm not sure if I sent the letters out on May 1st, but it was right around the 1st of May is when we sent out what's called the neighbor notice.
Okay, and is that Mr. Wiseman's address on there?
That's Mr. Wiseman's address. Well, at least that's the address I sent it to from.
So I guess the question I have, because ultimately as the one that sells these properties, in my mind, we go through this as a committee and everything. And one of the things we talk about, as we did with Paul Jones as our attorney, is did we properly notice everybody involved, including, in this case, the neighbor notice? So if we sent that out prior to the tax sale, I guess my question is, what further responsibility do we have?
I don't think that there's any, I don't think any of us are saying that you guys didn't do your responsibility, but we do have a process here in place for a protest. So we're hearing the protest so that we can make a decision as to what to do. I don't think there's any accusation coming from any three of us about that. And I think that staff clearly did its due diligence and notification.
So the question is, if Mr. Wiseman didn't find out till after the sale, does that mean he was out of town and didn't get the notice prior to the sale?
Well, so let me answer it this way for you. I know you mailed out the mail-in ballot, the vote by mail ballots.
Yeah.
Had I not known the clerk auditor personally been able to call you, for some reason, it didn't get sent to me from the post office, even though I know I was on the batch. That's my problem if we don't send it certified, but it's a great cost if we send it certified because we can't verify. So it's, again, not because Bert didn't do his job, not because you didn't, that's the hard part I have.
Yeah, I just would like Mr. Wiseman to just answer when he got the notice.
Yeah, the same day I called him after end of business day. Found it in the pile. We had been out of town in the gap between May and the property sale. Anything that comes out of my mouth right now, anybody could construe as an excuse. So, the hustle and bustle, like we have a new baby, like I'm recently married, like
yeah, but some of those excuses are actually allowed by law.
So there we go. Well then, whatever will work.
Okay. So what's the? And I believe we have one other individual that'd like to speak. Maybe we can hear from him, and then we can talk about a fix.
Yeah, I just feel I bought it at a legal tax sale. So, my name's Anthony Barnett, and I just feel like I bought it at a legal tax sale. So,
what's your intended, I guess, why and what? A property that has a value over 4 years of $26.
My intention is to sell it back to Mr. Wiseman for reasonable, just basically my time and help him get it so he can quick claim it over to him so he can combine it with his current property and he won't have this problem.
What do you consider reasonable?
About 500.
Mr. Wiseman, you willing to give him $500?
Let's see what they say.
One option would be to continue this for a week or for 2 weeks and let them try to work things out between the two of them.
Whatever you guys think.
See, so here's my problem. The thing I stated on why people buy it, that makes me even more want to vote against it because it's not in the public's best interest. That's my problem. How many of these are held back by the commission and not sold? There's a lot of these things that Richard ends up bringing to us and we find and stuff like that.
So for me, as it currently sits, I would tilt towards Mr. Wiseman and his reasoning, but I would personally, I think the simplest solution is let the two of them work it out.
Sure.
If we continue it for 2 weeks, if that's possible. Because from the tax collection standpoint, we have protected the interest of the county either way.
Yeah, we're going to either get the whole thing from Mr. Wiseman
or what we got from the tax sale. So for me, I think that's a very reasonable
then so I don't
approach.
have to listen to Paul. No, just kidding. Unless there's a reason I can't continue it, that's going to be my motion in conjunction for the chair.
Let me just, and I'll, with the circumstances that I've heard here and what has happened, I tend to lean towards Mr. Wiseman as well and in believing what he says, and so I think it would be advantageous, but I also would like to give it an opportunity for the two to just say, okay, let's see if we can just get this done without coming back in 2 weeks, and who knows, I don't know if you're taking off time of work or whatever the case is, but it'd be nice to see if we could just get resolved as well.
Okay.
Maybe I'll just make a 2-minute statement.
I'll give you 30 seconds, Paul. Go ahead.
This process of the tax sale, Commissioner Graves brought up the issue in Provo. This process of the tax sale actually is probably the single thing that will clean that up. If we don't try to sell these properties and try to work and get the taxes, they're going to remain in this cookie cutter situation. So the tax sale, and as you can see here, even in this situation, we're probably going to clean this parcel up that would not have happened otherwise.
Right, and we agree in the collection of taxes. We don't disagree
Well, absolutely,
with that.
yeah, but I'm talking about cleaning up the actual parcels.
I know, we need to have an ordinance that goes back and dings the title companies double and really collect taxes and fees. So anyway, I move that we continue item 20 for 2 weeks.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second to continue item 20. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, motion will carry 3-0. Next on our agenda is regular agenda item number 21. This is again dealing with the tax sale protest filed by Robert Polson on behalf of John Wolzine, I believe is the last name. We'll again look to Bert and Paul to introduce this particular protest.
Can we just check in the audience here if Mr. Paulson is here? And Mr. Hanson is here as well.
Okay.
Okay.
This is a much bigger piece.
This issue is a little more complicated, and again, I'll ask Mr. Harvey to go over the initial issues. Based on what I've seen, the commission will most likely like to hear from the interested parties and perhaps put a time limit on their comments, because again, it could go a while.
Okay, well, the other one was fairly simple. This one is not. This one's slightly more complex. The parcel that was sold, that's the parcel up on the screen. It was sold to Mr. Hanson to the highest bidder, but only 90% interest in the parcel. So this parcel was actually sold at a previous tax sale several years ago to Glenn Berg, and at that time it was sold as an undivided interest parcel, which means that not the entire ownership of the parcel was sold. We sold a 90% interest to Mr. Berg. The original owner was Mr. Sorensen. Mr. Berg purchased 90% at the tax sale. That's the portion that was delinquent, and that is the portion we sold to the highest bidder. So this parcel actually has two owners on it currently. We haven't transferred the tax deed yet. Obviously, we haven't done that yet. So the one owner is a gentleman by the name of Glenn Berg, who owns 90%, which he purchased through a previous tax sale. Sorry, I'm going in circles. And the other part is Mr. Wollenzine, who owns the remaining 10%, which he purchased from Mr. Sorensen after Mr. Sorensen lost the 90% at the tax sale, if I've got my timelines correct. And I'll let Mr. Wollenzine, of course, speak to his ownership story and how he came in possession and everything else like that. Mr. Wollenzine also owns, just a matter of record, owns all the parcels that essentially, the pieces of property that surround this piece, which is this piece right here, that piece, and that piece. Those are all owned by Mr. Wollenzine. So, and he also owns, like I said, a 10% interest in that piece.
So can you see the fireflies from that property?
Right here? Yeah. Yes, he does. Wollenzine. Yeah. So, anyways, in terms of process, we sent notifications out based on the address of record. Of course, this one having a little bit more complicated history, I did a little bit more research and a little bit more time, including with the addition of actually pulling a title report.
The red line just changed, so which parcel are we talking about?
All right, that's the parcel we're talking about.
Okay.
My apologies.
I just want to make sure.
Including sending out, including pulling a title report, because it is a fairly larger piece, so my standard operating procedure is to pull title reports for anything that might have a larger commercial interest or residential interest in it. The notice was going to Mr. Wollenzine. I also made attempts to notify Mr. Berg, but through my research found that he had passed away. I had not been able to find a next of kin until right before the tax sale. In fact, so I wasn't able to notify the next of kin prior to the tax sale, but I did notify the next of kin, the one that I could find based on the obituary, and notified them of this hearing so they could come here. And his name was Kenneth McHenry. I don't know if he's here, but he'd probably be needed to be given an opportunity to speak if he is. Anyways, with Mr. Wallenstein, I did also send him a neighbor notice because he has a 10% interest in the property, which included a preferred bidder application. He filled that out. That application was reviewed by the tax sale committee, and ultimately, between Brian and Paul, felt that it was not able to approve that application. So we did not give him preferred bidder status at the sale. He did, I believe, he did come to the sale, and he did competitively bid for the property, in which Mr. Hanson was the one who's ultimately the winner of the property. So in terms of notification, you know, we took extra steps. Mr. Wallenstein, who's the occupying owner of the properties around it and the 10% owner, was well notified. I had several conversations with him. So in terms of process, you know, I feel fairly strong about our process and what we did here, that we met the statutory requirement. And this was one we discussed quite a bit in the tax sale meetings run up. So, you know, not only just myself, but also Paul and Brian and the other members of the committee felt like that this was one we could go ahead and offer up for sale. So with that, I will,
Couple
if there's any other questions, yeah?
Is there a structure on this property?
It looks like there might be, but I've always been told by Andrew and Jeff not to totally trust this particular parcel map because of the angle and everything else like that. You know, it may not necessarily be correct as far as how, you know, we're looking straight down, and of course the earth is curved, so, you know, the angles on this may not be 100%, but it looks like and I believe you could probably ask Mr. Wallenstein for sure on this. I believe
half the building
might be some of the building, all the building might be part of that on that piece. So,
second question is on the preferred status. What was the criteria for not allowing that to happen?
But I think I'll let Paul or Brian speak to that. I usually when the preferred bidder application comes in, I always advocate for the applicant and let Paul and Brian, you know, pull me back. So I think Paul's got that, and he could speak to the application, and is why we decided ultimately to deny it. So. Okay.
I'll provide the commissioners with our county tax section in our county code.
We put this preferred status in, what, number of years ago?
The criteria for granting bidder preference is in 21-5-8. And A and B sort of go through some definitions. As far as the criteria goes, you'll look at subsection C, and it says that a parcel, well, first off, let me just mention section A, at the discretion of the county auditor, a parcel of real property may be offered at a preferred sale. So that's probably the best starting point to mention, is that the county legislative body, the Board of Commissioners, granted the clerk auditor that level of discretion to make that decision. In subsection C provides the criteria that a parcel may be offered. Number one, the parcel has been determined, again at the discretion of the clerk auditor, not to be an economically viable unit of property to other than a preferential interest, based upon consideration of such characteristics as size, shape, access, zoning, or other factors that may have that may affect the economic value and use of the parcel, or a non-preference sale of the parcel would create a nuisance and or cloud upon an existing interest in the property and could unreasonably diminish the value of such an interest. So that's step one, is to determine if the parcel itself would qualify for a preferential sale. If you find that that is the case, then you go to step two, which is in subpart D, to identify the individuals or entities that may be granted the preferred bidder status. So obviously in this instance, step one was not satisfied. The clerk auditor did not exercise discretion to make the determination that the parcel should be offered as a preferred sale.
And so why? What was the?
Well, let's take the first one, for example, Mr. Wiseman. I think it's pretty straightforward. The reason we offered preferred bidder status in his case, which we have a very narrow definition of, is because it looked like from the sale of the property that truly was within the boundaries of his property and belonged to him. This one, I know that Mr. Wollenseen has both sides, but Mr. Wollenseen also already had an interest. He knew that that parcel had problems with it, unlike Mr. Wiseman that wasn't aware initially. That's why we offered it. And just based upon our interpretation and how we do things, and because we don't necessarily pick winners and losers, between consulting with Paul and I, we both came to the determination that this was one that we could not legally, in our minds, based upon the code, justify granting a preferred bidder status to.
Let me just add to that. This parcel is a fully platted parcel. That the group that subdivided this property actually subdivided that parcel the way it looks right now. Whereas the last one was a leftover, this one was an intentionally platted parcel. So it's hard to say that it's not economically viable when the subdivider platted it just like that.
Got it. That's all I needed to hear on that.
Makes sense. All right, we're good. We'll hear from the parties.
Robert Polson. And this is Mr.
Wollenseen.
First of all, this parcel of property has basically cliffs on each side that drop about 80 feet, if you're familiar with the hollow there. This is inside the hollow, except for potentially a little bit that goes against Mr. Wollenseen's parking area there and that outbuilding. And then it may go up to the home that's, if you look to the top of that picture there, the home, it may go up to that home, but Mr. Wollenseen can demonstrate that there were surveys in that did not include that much property before, and so that would need to be surveyed more appropriately to see exactly what it does take in. This was never suitable to be a building lot. It may have been subdivided as such, but it was never suitable to be a building lot. And in fact, on the plat with the county, which I have a copy here, it specifically says not suitable as a building lot. This parcel also gathers at the top there the storm water, and it flows down through there. In addition, there is an aquifer that ends there, and in about the middle of July, water flows in there on a good year. It's flowing presently and just barely started, but probably won't have a major flow through there this year because of the water condition this year. So it is not a suitable building lot, and will never be built as a building lot.
You said by the county is giving you something that says, or by county code or something. My question would be, because that makes sense for us, but with Spanish Fork's code, because I know there's always been this talk down here of annexation, and it's in an annexation plan they have. Does Spanish Fork code ever allow that to be a building lot? Are you aware of that?
I can't address Spanish Fork, but I can show if you'd like to see this.
The ground is really, there's no way you can put a home down in that hole. It's wetland down in there. The sides of the hill are so steep that if you start digging into the side, and we had this problem just down from us, then the sides start sloughing. The water seeps out all along the bottom. The trees and everything that grows there on the sides are holding the bank. They keep the
erosion from happening. There's only one access to get down there, and that's, if you look at the street, you can see right in the middle of it, in the middle of
That
the
little trailway.
that little trailway going down, that's the only way down in there, and it's very, very steep. You can sled down that trailway in the winter.
But that's from your property.
And that's all my property. The only access to that property there is that way right there, and it's a very narrow trail. It's like 6-7 feet wide. Before it showed it cutting through my building, and now the coming up on top, the line showed coming through my building, and then at the sale, it shows going clear out into my parking lot. I asked them in mapping, I said,
in your driveway.
In my driveway, yeah. And I says, now you're saying you own more property than what you showed before. And I said, how can you just change it like that? And she says, well, we just redid it. And I guess you even said that you just remapped them and drew new property lines. If that's the case, I said, how can you just do that? Just say that this is my property now.
I think we're kind of mixing up two different things. The way this works, the lines aren't exactly the lines. So when you see that red, that doesn't mean that's the exact line.
Yes, and we've addressed that, I think, before.
Because the lines we do are by the title, the title we get in.
Did I get to the preferential?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, a preferential sale is one in which a single designated parcel of real property is offered for a sale at the annual property tax sale, in which only bidders that have the preferred bidder status will be able to participate. Mr. Wallenstein was sent a form. He filled out the form, turned it back in, and here's the criteria that's found in that section 2158, and I addressed that in the appeal that we made. Number one, the parcel has been determined not to be an economically viable unit. Okay? And this has been determined by the county to not be an economically viable unit in that it is not suitable as a building lot. It says it right on the county's records. In addition, there's...
Actually, the one that says in there that I think fits more is access.
Right, and I was just going to move on. Just going to move on now to the access issue. There is no access to this lot independent of Mr. Wallenstein's property. What Mr. Wallenstein would like to do, if he's able to get this property, is for the other owner of the property. He would love to deed that so that if in fact there is a problem with the property line, he'd like to get some property deeded to him so that he doesn't have that problem. It goes across his lawn. It goes across right to the corner of the house. The house could not have been built based upon that. What he'd like to do is just get the property and deed it to him. So that won't be an issue. So there is no access. And so we go down to the sale itself. So a parcel that has been determined not to be an economically viable unit of property, other than the preferential interest based on consideration of such characteristics as size, shape, access, zoning, or other factors. So this may be a larger parcel than what you're talking back with number 20, but in fact, it has no access to it, and the only value to that property is Mr. Wallenstein's being able to go down there, and he has the other property, and he goes down there and he takes care of the property in a way that there aren't additional weeds growing and so forth, but he has access for it that his family can go down there on occasion and enjoy being in a little cooler spot and enjoy the property. He already did own the 10%, has been explained, but there is no interest in that except to him as far as any kind of economic interest or any other interest, valuable. Secondly, it says a non-preference sale of the parcel would create a nuisance and/or cloud upon the existing interest in the property. So he owned the 10%, and apparently some of his property that he's built that outbuilding on, or it was there maybe when you came, but it was there when he bought the property 20 years ago, that would have that conflict with that. He does have a 10% interest in the property, and so he would share as a joint tenant or a tenant in common. But that property now has been clouded to the point, if the sale were to go through, the purchaser, when the sale had gone through, it's told him in front of the county employees that he would in fact bring a lawsuit against Mr. Wollenzine, and that he would get his other 10% of that, and so forth, and it became a rather heated thing without Mr. Wollenzine participating in it. So we do have that concern about the clouding of this. And lastly, let me turn to the statute again. It says, the bidder owns a parcel or parcels that abut the parcel being offered for the preferred sale. He owns the parcels all around that lot.
Which part's that? I don't see that on.
Okay, if you'll look, he was explained before, but everything that you can see there on the outside of that red line is.
No, I mean in the code. That I just meant.
Where does it say it?
Where's it? Which part of the code is that?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I've been following along really well, and that
okay,
was
it's number
skipped.
2. Okay, D has 1 and 2.
Okay. Okay.
Bidder owns a parcel or parcels that abut the parcel being offered for preferred sale. So what we're saying is that he qualified under all the conditions to be a preferred purchaser under this. He allowed the sale to go through because he thought that would clear up the title concerns. He was denied his preferred position. And what we're asking is that this sale be set aside, and certainly the sale would come up, or the property could come up for sale next year. And what Mr. Wollenzine would plan on doing is paying all the back taxes, even though he's current on his 10%, but he would pay all the back taxes. He would try to figure out how to get a hold of Mr. Berg or his estate to get this resolved, and then he would want to resolve it with them as far as purchasing the remainder, and then deed whatever portion of this parcel would be necessary so that his neighbor is not there with a non-conforming use on his property, and that he can continue to enjoy quietly the use of his property.
Thank you.
Any questions? We addressed all of that in the letter we sent.
I appreciate that. I believe there's another party here if they'd like to speak.
I'd like to state a little bit about the history of the ownership of this property.
You need to state your name for the record, please.
Spence Hansen. I'm the successful bidder at the May tax sale. The Sorensen Trust owned the properties that part of the Wolf Creek development, and in 2002, the taxes were not paid on this particular lot. We're talking about lot 36, and so the county sold 90% to a Mr. Berg. 10% was redeemed by the Sorensens and held by the Sorensens. That 10%, this was in 2002. In 2008, Mr. Mr. Wollenzine purchased the 10% ownership from Mr. Berg, and so Mr. Berg then owned 90%, And, no, I beg your pardon. In 2008, the 10% that was owned by the Sorensens was purchased by Mr. Wallenstein. And Mr. Berg then, at that time, owned 90%, and Mr. Wallenstein owned 10%. So Mr. Wallenstein, from 2008 to the present, was fully aware of the situation that that the Bergs, Mr. Berg is of course deceased, but his family and so on owned 90%, and Mr. Wallenstein owned 10%. There was no surprises here. And during that entire period of time, it appears that there was no special effort, or at least Mr. Wallenstein did not acquire that. So there was no real surprises for Mr. Wallenstein. Now, what happened at the 2017 tax sale, I simply stepped into the shoes of Mr. Berg. And so there is no fundamental difference between the situation before the tax sale and the situation after the tax sale. Now, I'm an experienced engineer, and this is over half an acre of land in a very favorable location in Spanish Fork. The reason I purchased that is the possibility of building a residence for myself on that piece of property, or perhaps another piece of property in Spanish Fork. I presently live in Mammoth, which is a suburb of Eureka and very small, and it's not to my satisfaction. So at any rate...
Can I ask you with that, how would you access your property?
The property does have legal access, and the corner of the property, the northeast corner, touches Scenic Drive. And I've been advised that access can be obtained through that corner of that property and into the balance of the property. And the law provides for solutions for problems such as this. The first possibility, and the one that I offered to Mr. Wallenstein, was that I would purchase his 10%. He approached me as I was leaving the auction to go to my bank and get a cashier's check for the money that I bid on this property, and I didn't have time to talk with him. I simply offered to purchase his interest. He turned me down, okay? So I left. There was very, very little conversation at that time, and Mr. Wallenstein told me things that I found were not true about the property. For one thing, the water problem is much exaggerated, and the access is possible through the northeast corner of the property. And so being a subdivision, you have legal access. So that's not a problem. And as an engineer, I believe that problems, engineering problems, can be solved and actually made into a viable building lot. So Mr. Wallenstein is no worse off than he was before the tax sale. Bergs owned 90%, he owned 10% for 10 years. That was the situation. And the problem with the water has been exaggerated. The property does have legal access, and it has actual access to the corner of the property that enters onto the right-of-way of Scenic Drive. And
how wide is that access point that touches the road?
I don't know how wide it is, but
I know.
But the second possibility is that we could compromise. In other words, if there's some problems that we have, and I frequently have dealt with problems of compromising with people. You've got something they need, they have something you need, so you compromise it and you work it out. The worst of all possible situations, but it is a possibility, is to ask the court to partition the property. And that is a possibility that you could take the matter to a court of suitable jurisdiction, which in this case would be the 4th District Court, and ask them to partition the property in a fair way according to their judicial expertise. So the property does have possible use. And also, Utah County has put a marketable tax valuation of $23,100 on this property. Now, they didn't make that up. This county is well organized, well managed, and the people in the valuation and appraisal division know what they're doing. $23,100 is the price that the marketable tax valuation is set at. Now, yes, there are problems here, but I've solved problems before, and I think that the engineering problems are the problems that can be solved. The other problems can also be solved. We have in this county and many other places a presumption of regularity. Now, I behaved in a regular fashion. I did my research before the tax sale. I showed up at the tax sale. I bid against other bidders. I was a successful bidder. I went to my bank, got the cashier's check for the amount of my bid, paid it to the treasurer as is required. That's regular. Now, Mr. Wallenstein filed a application for preferential bidding on a form that says on the front of it, you must submit this 14 days in advance. He submitted the application for preferential bidding on the 11th, the 14 days in advance of the 17th of May tax sale would have been the 3rd of May. So Mr. Wallenstein has not been regular. I've been regular. I did my research. I showed up at the tax sale. I registered as I should. I was a successful bidder, and I went and got the cashier's check and I paid for it. And I stepped into the shoes of Mr. Berg, who had owned 90% for the previous 10 years, while Mr. Wallenstein owned 10%. I think that the decision made by the county not to grant a preferential tax sale was correct, and I request respectfully that the county retain that decision and not overturn it.
Thank you.
He's asking if we want to hear from him again.
Do you have an additional comment?
Yes, just that I went to this property for the first time yesterday. And if that red line is correct, which it's probably not, the only access that he would have to the property would be less than a few inches without protruding onto both of the neighbors, the neighbor to the north, and then, of course, Mr. Wallenstein, which is the neighbor on the side over there. Mr. Wallenstein turned his paper in the day he got it. So he doesn't know, you know, you didn't get to him 14 days early. They were kind enough, the tax commission was kind enough to send the document. He turned it in. And based upon what I walked you through with the preferential sale law, it seems like this is just right on point. Every provision that applies to what a preferential sale can be, it's right on point. Secondly, that access, if you go out about 10 or so feet, you're going to drop 80 feet. There is, number one, there may be a touching of the road or there may not. Secondly, there's no way that you could get down that from that road. And if people from the county need to go out and take a look at this, I would advise it before, if you feel that's necessary, before a decision's to be made. The problem here is that the very thing that you were alluding to earlier about people coming in and trying to take advantage of a situation is what's occurred here with this sale. Number one, it should never have gone through. The preferential sale should have happened